Hangout in the Holy Land, Land Grant Holy Land's video podcast, episode 4. Huge day in coaching news. Weird day in coaching news. Lots of, maybe in hindsight, not necessarily super mind-blowing things, but stuff that just hadn't leaked. And I think that, when an athletic director does his job and keeps these things on the down low, it definitely makes for a much more interesting process. Arkansas's Jeff Long did just that. And we've heard all kinds of weird scuttlebutt and rumors after the fact, and who knows what's true and what's just smoke and mirrors. But nonetheless, Wisconsin's Bret Bielema, the hated coach that Ohio State fans have really grown to despise in the last several years for a variety of reasons, is now heading for at least the fiscally greener shores of West Lafayette, of Western Arkansas. We'll get to West Lafayette in a second. Nonetheless, Bret Bielema is heading to coach the Arkansas Razorbacks, the team that Ohio State defeated in the now vacated Sugar Bowl in 2011. So, interesting move. What are your thoughts on it?
I'm definitely not going to be sorry to see Bret go. I'm tired of seeing his fat face. I'm tired of listening to him complain. He's only beaten Ohio State once out of 6 tries. I felt like it was a lot more than that. But then when you look everything up, it's not like he was really that big of a thorn in the side. He was just annoying.
Right.
But I just filed a piece on this that will run tomorrow. But I'm not terribly sure that he's going to be that great of a coach. I know that people have drawn some parallels between Wisconsin and Arkansas, and that both states don't really have this huge amount of in-state talent to recruit from, and they're going to have to go out of state. But Wisconsin had a bunch of recruiting advantages that they're not going to have in the SEC. You're surrounded by a bunch of states where, if Wisconsin wants a guy in Minnesota, they could get him. If they want a guy in Iowa, they can probably get him. They're not really surrounded by threats other than maybe Michigan or Ohio State coming and poaching the random upper Midwest kid that's really good. And in Arkansas, you're surrounded by not just all these SEC teams that are going to recruit just like Urban Meyer did, but then you've got Texas you're going to be fighting schools for. You're going to be fighting Clemson and FSU for kids. And for a guy that's never enjoyed a reputation for being a very, very good recruiter, I think it's going to be really interesting to see if he could step up his game enough to be able to bring the talent needed. Because if he's bringing in classes like he was at Wisconsin, or even just a little bit better than that, he's going to get completely buried.
So I'm going to go to play devil's advocate for just a second. Well, not to undermine your piece or undermine your general argument, but there's no reason Bret Bielema still can't get those same kids from Iowa and Wisconsin and Minnesota to come play for him at Arkansas. And if anything, Bret Bielema's good at finding gems, finding diamonds in their rough. And I think he's going to continue to be able to do that. Arkansas is not a talent-rich state by any means. The Southwest corridor near Texas has some. I'm thinking in particular of Texarkana, which is split right down the middle between the Texas and the Arkansas border. They tend to produce some kids every single year. Ryan Mallett comes to mind, a couple other people. Maybe Chase Daniel, or maybe he's a Dallas area product. Either way, Texas is also a huge state, and East Texas, has historically been something that's very winnable for Arkansas. So I think that a lot of it's going to depend on who the guys he brings as assistant coaches. Though I brought this up the other day. Mike Leach in his book said that one of the biggest mistakes he made at Texas Tech was hiring he brought in a local guy thinking that he needed to have someone that knew West Texas in order to be able to recruit at Texas Tech. And that guy, he said, was his worst recruiter. And it wasn't like that he didn't have the most connections. He did. He had the trust of the high school coaches. He had their respect. He had history there and a resume that spoke for itself, really. But the guy just didn't work relatively as hard as some of these younger guys. And so I think, maybe if he thinks Matt Canada is the right guy, I know that Bret Bielema was glowing of Canada, who adapted from his spread style offense. And it's another interesting thing is that Bielema, he's run that Wisconsin offense because that's the talent that he had. Perhaps, in a new start, at a place like Arkansas, maybe Matt Canada can open it up and run that Northern Illinois offense that he, brought with him, or at least brought in the back of his mind anyway to Madison. But Fayetteville's gonna be an interesting challenge for Bielema. I think I said this on the site in the comments. Bielema has done maybe all he can at Wisconsin. It's not going to be a team that wins national championships. 3 Rose Bowls, even if they lose all 3, is an unbelievable accomplishment. It doesn't sound like that Bret Bielema will be able to coach the Rose Bowl despite the fact that he wants to. There's even a rumor that Barry Alvarez might come out from the athletic director's box and coach the game, which would be kind of cool. I still think that for all the hubbub, I think that Stanford is somewhere between a 7 and 10 point favorite, depending on which sports book you look at. I think that Wisconsin matches up decently. They came out of nowhere and blew out Nebraska in the Big Ten championship game this last weekend. And on that note, there is an uncorroborated rumor that supposedly Arkansas was circling on Nebraska's Bo Pelini. We're all prepared to make him a similar offer to what they wound up giving Bret Bielema, which is around $4 million a year, which is pretty sizable. I think Bielema was making $2.5–3 million at Wisconsin, so by no means a tiny raise.
It's pretty reasonable. It's just an extra $1.5 million a year raise. I mean, no big thing, right?
Hypothetically, I saw another report. I think our Wisconsin blog on SB Nation, Bucky's Fifth Quarter, which has done a great job of covering things for Bielema. They were completely caught off guard, and those guys have put up like a dozen posts tonight already, which is remarkable. I can't even imagine what we would do if Urban Meyer resigned or abruptly left for like the Texas job or something like that.
I would start drinking.
Yeah, well, I mean that's
which would really just be tragic.
Yeah, I don't know how quality your news post would be after that fact, but nonetheless, they've done a great job covering it. I think I saw it on their site. I didn't have a chance to read the article; it was a busy day in the office, but I think that I saw that he only got a modest raise, so maybe it was only $500,000 or $1 million or something. Only $500,000 or $1 million. That would more than we'll make in the next decade, right? But no, I mean, all joking aside, I think that regardless of the money thing, I think the challenge is what a guy like Bielema is just drawn to by his competitive nature to do stuff that he hasn't done before. I mean, that's variety is the spice of life, and for a guy like Bielema, the thrill can sometimes the chase of it all can be what's most appealing. And if Wisconsin's in a comfort zone, he's just winning 9-10 games, in this case 8, but winning or historically, if at least from his tenure there and in Madison, winning about 9-10 games every year and competing for Leaders Division titles now in the championship game world of the Big Ten in the modern era. Maybe that didn't drive him anymore. Maybe he wants to go see how he measures up. Worst case scenario, he pulls a rich rod and is terminated in 3 or 4 seasons. He's a good enough coach and a great enough defensive coordinator to certainly be able to land somewhere. So I think it's for him it's a real no risk proposition. There's going to be a lot more pressure than probably he is accustomed to at Wisconsin, but I think it's a decent hire. I mean, the guy is a grade A, D-bagger, so it's a lot easy, especially just kind of given the villain that he's become in almost like cartoonish terms for Ohio State fans. I was celebrating it on Twitter, mostly tongue-in-cheek. I mean, I think the guy is a very good coach, given that he did what he did at Wisconsin. I think I saw that Barry Alvarez had a 727 career winning percentage, .727, which is remarkable for Wisconsin, especially given how long he was there. Bielema's was even higher. It was like 7.3 or 7.4. And so,
now, to be fair, throughout his entire duration, they played less than nobody out of conference, with the exception of this year. Yeah, I mean, their best win outside of the Big Ten and outside of bowls was they beat Fresno State one year when they were preseason and ranked like 21, and then they didn't end up really doing anything that year. So I mean, sure, going like 65-28 or whatever his record was. That's impressive no matter what. But he wasn't running beating USC every week.
But he was competitive in the Big Ten. I know he lost some games he shouldn't have. He lost to a down Michigan team. I remember that one of Rich Rod's first 2 seasons. He also, sometimes his schedules were favorable even in the Big Ten. I think I saw that he dodged both of Ohio State's national championship qualifying teams during his tenure. Mm-hmm. So, maybe there was some of those things to his favor. But the guy won games. I think he's a very good coach. I think, again, the assistants in many of these hires do make or break it. We saw what Rich Rodriguez did with his defensive coordinators. He gave up on Tim Schafer too soon, went to Greg Robinson, which was just an abomination, was never able to recover after that. So if Bret Bielema gets some good guys, especially, maybe he maintains the right guys. It was interesting enough, 2 former Ohio State assistants, Tabor Johnson and Paul Hayes. Now, the Arkansas defense was abysmal this year, and Bielema being a defensive guy, I can't see him necessarily keeping Hayes, but maybe Johnson will stick around as a secondary coach. I know Tim Horton, I believe, is their running backs coach and a well-respected recruiter in the SEC area. We'll see what they do. I mean, it should be interesting. That could make or break his tenure in Arkansas. Shifting gears here, Monday night we saw the Heisman finalists announced. Texas A&M's Johnny Manziel, the runaway favorite, along with Notre Dame's Manti Te'o, who we've talked about a lot on the site, and then K-State's Colin Klein were the 3 finalists. Historically, when there are 3 finalists, that either means that those 3 are so far ahead away from the rest of the pack that they have no choice but to only invite 3, or that one is so far ahead of the pack that it just wouldn't make sense to invite the other guys. They know the results before they even choose these guys, so a lot of it is just kind of more pomp and circumstance than anything. I've been on record as saying that Manziel's my guy. I'm completely fine with Te'o winning as well, and Chris Kopech on our site started to write this piece that was going to compare Ryan Shazier. I think the conventional wisdom is that he's better, at least based on his gaudy numbers and based on what we've seen. Watching 12 Ohio State games this season was potentially better than Te'o. But the more he investigated, the more film he watched, the more research he did for this mini feature that we ran yesterday that still up on the site about just kind of the narrative behind Te'o's Heisman campaign. The more he came to the conclusion that Te'o was a completely deserving candidate and possibly a better linebacker than Shazier. I think most would agree with that, especially given kind of just all the Notre Dame defense around him. I think it's been said that Notre Dame's only accounted for the 3rd fewest plays on defense all season, and there's a reason for that. Nonetheless, Braxton Miller, Ohio State's sophomore star quarterback, was snubbed in the mix. Thoughts on that? Like, I'm honestly okay with it given how he closed the season. Not particularly strong against Wisconsin or Michigan. Manziel was just, for his down game was 3 interceptions on 3 tipped passes, not one of which was graded by his coaches as his fault. Take those away, he actually had a pretty solid game aside. He was shut down on the running aspect, but Miller had games where he was shut down rushing too, so I think that's kind of out the window. Klein, I don't know, his numbers are quite as gaudy as Braxton Miller's, but I think just, especially all he did for Kansas State, taking them into an 11-1 record in the Big 12 championship, he's completely deserving. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So before I get to Braxton, I want to talk real quick about the statistics argument around Te'o versus Shazier versus some other people, and we talked about this a little bit on Twitter today. I want to read you 2 stat lines here. One is a linebacker in his last 2 games recorded 6 tackles and 5 tackles. 6 total tackles in 2 games for loss and 1 interception. The other linebacker B, over the 2 games, recorded 25 tackles, 16 solo, 9 assisted. Who do you think those 2 linebackers are, just based on those 2 numbers?
I'm guessing that maybe the first is Te'o and the second is some little college guy. I have no idea.
Yeah, basically. The first one's Te'o. The second one's Marvin Burdett, who plays linebacker for UAB. He's, I think, number 1 in the country right now in total tackles. He's number 2 in solo tackles. He's put up some fairly ridiculous numbers over the last couple of games, but nobody who's watched him on TV, I think, would credibly say, oh my gosh, Marvin, look at these ridiculous numbers. Marvin Burdett for Heisman, Marvin Burdett for all the linebacker awards. And I think that's the case if you actually watch Notre Dame and you look at the fact that their defenses on the field for such a less amount of time compared to other schools. Consider the fact that there's so many other playmakers that Te'o doesn't have to go catch somebody because the defensive line didn't get any pressure or somebody messed something up. You look at the fact that he never over pursues or seems to be out of position, is able to drop back into coverage so effectively. There's so many things that don't get picked up by the numbers. I think there's our ability to track defensive stats in college football, at least to the casual fan, is not nearly as developed as it is for quarterbacks or running backs. You can look like, holy crap, this look at these gajillion yards and these gajillion pass completions, and it's harder to do that on the defensive.
There's
side.
also not even official defensive statistics, so what you see at one site might not be measured the same way by the other. They're very arbitrary. And, just not to totally derail you, but I just feel like any of the people that are making anti-Te'o arguments are just being Notre Dame haters. Like, maybe they watched a game and a half total of Notre Dame plays, play in, play out. I mean, you don't have, 6, 7 interceptions like he had. That's not an accident at linebacker. That's absurd. Like, that'd be a remarkable season for a defensive back. Like, some of the best defensive backs in the country don't have those numbers. Bradley Roby doesn't have that many picks. Travis Howard led the Buckeyes in interceptions. I think he doesn't even have that many.
Oh yeah, I mean there are teams that don't have 7 interceptions this year, and let the record state, I am a Notre Dame hater. I don't like them
I'm not
at all.
far removed. My father was in college when Notre Dame upset Texas for the national title. I think in either 70 or 71, whatever that was. And he thought that the players on Notre Dame really showed it up at the Cotton Bowl, which is essentially kind of like a home game for Texas. That they were like celebrating at the 50-yard line, being at the time, you didn't show up your opponent back in the day, and he thought Notre Dame did that way beyond today's day where every single team does that sort of stuff. And so he hated Notre Dame. He raised me to hate Notre Dame. Even my 80-plus-year-old grandmother, a lifelong Texan, another Texas fan, hates Notre Dame. You're not going to find me cheering for them unless they're playing like maybe Alabama. Nonetheless, I've watched Te'o play, and there's a reason that he grades out as a consensus top 5 pick in the NFL draft. It's not just because he plays for Notre Dame. It's not just because Notre Dame doesn't have a great quarterback or a great running back. They have a solid quarterback, and they have who's remarkably Krenzel-esque. And they've got 2 guys that played well. Tommy Rees was the butt of every joke from every Notre Dame fan going into the season. And even in his mop-up duty when Everett Golston was banged up or ineffective, Rees was fine. He was solid. And I just think that you're not viewing things objectively if you just immediately dismiss Te'o or call him marginal or average. Like, and the ironic thing is some of these guys criticizing him, when Te'o is starring for the Browns or whatever team they root for, the Bengals, they're just gonna have to suck it up and root for him because he's a great player, and I think that I don't see any reason why it's not going to translate to the next level physically, mentally. He just seems ready.
Yeah.
He's like, an adult literally playing with kids, and those kids happen to be very, very good, but it might be sometimes while he disappears in the action because he's playing with an elite level defense, one of the 6 best in the country. So
yeah, and he's not going to over pursue somebody to go to get that ESPN highlight hit.
He doesn't have to. He's not.
Yeah.
His middle linebacker isn't a fullback. And Zach Boren played remarkable, but you can't tell me that Ryan Shazier didn't have to step up his game in certain instances on his side of the field when Boren was out of position. We saw Boren miss tackles and things of that nature because he was learning on the fly.
Yeah, he's a
Te'o's
fullback.
got 4 years of conditioning, was the number 2 player I think in the country in his class coming out of high school. Everyone wanted him. He was a beast then. He's a beast now. I'm completely fine with it. Even if he wins, I think Manziel will probably win easily.
I think so too.
And I think that's deservedly so. But I think the Te'o is a great player and definitely Heisman worthy. Anyway, moving on to the bowl games. Yeah, you wrote about all 35 matchups. Kudos to you, sir. That takes some real gumption. I've watched at least parts of. I think the fewest quarters of action I've watched in the last 2 years were like 2.5 quarters. I think it was one of the Christmas Eve or Christmas games, like the Hawaii Bowl. And I'm a pretty hardcore bowl enthusiast and a completist. I don't like watching TV seasons unless I can watch all the episodes. I don't like watching a TV series unless I can watch all the seasons. I'm the same way with bowl season. I don't like watching a bowl unless I can watch all of it. I don't like watching the bowl season unless I can watch all of it. So I'm going to watch a ton of terrible football games, and I'm excited about
yes,
it.
you are.
Any particular games, though, the Big Ten has a brutal stretch. I think they're Vegas underdogs in all 7 of their games, and deservedly so. Feel good about Northwestern against a kind of I don't overrated is not the right word, but a team that really hasn't beaten anybody, Mississippi State.
I think overrated is an appropriate word if you're
okay.
If you're still getting love and you lost to Ole Miss and you haven't beaten anybody of note. I mean, even though I know Ole Miss has improved a lot over the last weeks of the season. But yeah, I remember when I first saw the matchups, I'm like, the Big Ten can win 3 of those games. Now that I think about it a little bit more and I look at the matchups, I'm like, oh my God, we may only win 1, and it's completely conceivable that we lose all of them. It's nice that we don't have the SEC tribal mentality. I quite frankly don't give a crap at all if TCU beats Michigan State. I don't have any emotions towards them.
I'll tell you, the only thing that annoys me is just the mindless group chatter of the cousin girthers, like, check out how big my cousin's blank is. Like, that's literally the mentality of the SEC because these teams hate each other when they play each other, and yet these people are so insecure with their day-to-day lives that they have to get validation by their arch rival teams beating other teams. They're Auburn fans that will unironically do SEC cheers. If Michigan beats South Carolina, I'm not going to care. Like, I'm not going to be happy. Like, I might say some stuff like just to troll South Carolina fans because that's funny, but I'm not going to gain any, I'm not going to get any endorphin drip in my brain one way or the other because, our arch rivals put their, finally put it all together on offense after losing to the 3 best teams they've played all season. Northwestern getting a bowl win, that's something I can get behind because they've never won one. If Jerry Kill somehow remarkably stole a game that he's almost double-digit underdogs, and that would be a neat story.
Yeah, I'd be happy with that.
I weirdly enough kind of like Mark D'Antonio, so if they trolled TCU and they finished above 500, maybe I'll root for them. But if you're asking me if I'm going to be rooting for Wisconsin against Stanford, unless just from a narrative perspective, there's no chance. And if the Big Ten goes 7-0 or 0-7, it's not going to impact me either way. Ohio State not playing in a bowl is really the only thing I care about at the end of the day.
Yeah. Now, as far as games that I think are going to be particularly compelling, I'm excited for Clemson LSU. I think that's
going to be a heck of a game.
We have a year where Clemson miraculously didn't really Clemson.
Not yet.
No, not yet. But there's still time, and you have a team that has really one of the best collections of just skill position players against, but a really pretty pedestrian offensive line against a team that kills people on defense. And
Absolutely.
So the disparity in play style and personnel I think is going to be pretty interesting. I can't think of any result in that game that would surprise me. And then as a noted points explosion enthusiast, I think you really had to be pretty excited about Baylor and UCLA.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. The other thing is, on that note, Art Briles turns down Arkansas's overtures and takes an extension to stay in Central Texas. I've driven through Waco probably 200 or 300 times in my life. That's not a place I ever want to live, but he's a Texas guy through and through. I mean, he's coached in Lubbock, he coached in Houston. I mean, he's been all over the place, and I think that, if you're a Central Texas guy and you can't get a Texas job necessarily, if Waco's for you, right on, man. And I think that he's got a great thing going there. They came on really strong at the end of the year. They knocked down Oklahoma State a couple pegs in some bowls, and then you've got UCLA. Actually, Jim Mora Jr. allegedly turned down the option to interview with Tennessee and Auburn. So I guess he's pretty satisfied with what he's got going on with Westwood. They took a chance on him. He's going to continue to honor that agreement. That should be a heck of a game.
I think UCLA is a better job than Tennessee right now, anyway. So I would stay there.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely more security there, and he's like the guy that did it after Rick Neuheisel and Carl Durrell didn't really get it done. So I can see that. Yeah, Tennessee is definitely a lot of expectations, but a lot of work to be done. So and the guy like he's been an NFL guy. Like a city like LA for somebody like that is definitely more appealing than Knoxville. I like Knoxville, Tennessee quite a bit. Don't get me wrong, but yeah, it's definitely like he doesn't seem like a college guy to me. Like he's almost more like a Pete Carroll, where
Yeah.
he's just kind of like maybe biding his time before he goes back to the NFL, or like maybe bringing an NFL type approach to the college level. I guess maybe the only other game that I guess everyone's going to be talking about, Kansas State, Oregon, which could have been the national championship had both those teams not slipped up the same weekend. That's going to be a fun one to watch. I'm looking forward to that maybe even more than the national championship game, to be honest.
I am too. I think I wrote that in the article. The national championship game is interesting because it's the national championship and there's all this
It's
tradition.
going to be like a Florida
It's like
State, Oklahoma 13-2 game again.
Yeah, I mean I know Big Ten traditionalists and everything, and 9-6 football games are supposed to be beautiful, but
Thumbs down to that.
I will be bored, and I
Yeah.
don't really like either of those schools anyways.
It really is impossible to. We don't want to root for a meteor because that would incur mass loss of life, possibly even be extending beyond the stadium. But we can certainly root for them to both look so unimpressive that maybe 12-0 Ohio State, who closed strong, looks strong in comparison. Wrapping things up, Ohio State's basketball team. We talked last week a lot about the Duke game. Wound up not quite necessarily going according to form. It's not so much that the Buckeyes even lost, but the fact that Ohio State blew a lead with 5 minutes to go. It felt a lot like that Kansas loss in the Final Four last year, where Ohio State wasn't necessarily the better team, but even without Deshaun Thomas and Aaron Kraft, they were kind of really ahead of the Duke and keeping up with them in the first half. Never were able to get Deshaun Thomas involved in the second half. Had no viable scoring option. Aaron Kraft continued that game on to the next game against Northern Kentucky, a first-year Division I program, and continues to just look lost on the offensive side of the ball. It's not. The good thing is it's not conference play yet. We're not playing Kansas, but what are your thoughts going into the Beach game, or Long Beach State, the Beach as they're called?
I am really not worried at all. I wasn't really.
It's hard to be.
Yeah, I mean, like you and I both agreed that Ohio State was probably going to go into the Duke game as a slight underdog. I watched it all. I think they competed the whole way through. They just didn't get it. They didn't make shots at the end. And if there's one thing I've learned from all of these Uncle Drew commercials with Kyrie Irving is that the game has always been about buckets. And if you're not getting those buckets, then it's tough to win at a place like Duke.
Maybe that's what we need. Maybe we need Deshaun Thomas and Aaron Kraft to wear prosthetic makeup and look like 7-year-olds.
I think that's the problem. Deshaun
the one
Thomas, he can't grow a beard right on by himself. So if you have to glue some stuff,
you're spot on. The one with Kevin Love is especially an enjoyable Uncle Drew episode. But let's I think in terms of what Long Beach State brings to the table, it's a team that in the Big West last year kind of I don't want to say they surprised. I think they were a good team all season, but they won that conference tournament. Winning is kind of a darling 12 seed. I remember a lot of people were picking them, and then New Mexico just absolutely
boat raced them.
They won them by, I think it was a 13-point final victory. Steve Alford, getting off the snide in his own regard. But I think that it's just they're not the team that they were. I think they've got off to a pretty rough start. I know they played North Carolina and it didn't end pretty. They lost that by like 10 or 15. They played Arizona, another ranked team, and they got blown the heck out.
They got blown out by USC too. And
that was another big game.
I don't think they're that good. I mean, I think Nebraska beat USC. So I don't know.
Somehow they played Fresno twice. Is that right? Like
I
saw that.
They have a home and home with Fresno.
Yeah, that's weird. It's like a non-conference home and home because Fresno's in the Mountain West, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know if there was a scheduling problem. I mean, I'll have to pull it up.
That's really bizarre. Yeah, we'll have to look at it for the preview. It's a little bit earlier in the week. I did already do some, kind of precursory research like I do to lead it. It's like my, they've got the pre party and the after party or whatever. I have my preview. I know you're right in the game this week, but I still like to be up on the teams that we play. So I was looking at some of the stats this afternoon, and they've got this kid, Mike Caffey, who's I think a reliable scoring one guard, and then they've got I think James Ennis, who was like their leading scorer, actually had really good numbers. He was like a 16-7 or a 16-8 type guy. He's a bigger kid, 6'7", maybe a slasher, swing guard type. So it's not like they don't have guys capable of putting the ball in the bucket, but they haven't been able to stop anyone. So that bodes well for dudes like Deshaun Thomas. And then we saw LaQuinton Ross kind of starting to look like LaQuinton Ross than they thought he would be, especially NBA scouts. Really lit it up against Northern Kentucky. He was that game's player of the game and that game's leading scorer. If he's the number 2 that Ohio State needs, and Aaron Kraft can find a semblance between Aaron Kraft of old and Aaron Kraft at the beginning of the season, I think Ohio State can be in a very good place.
No, I completely agree. I was a little bit skeptical after Aaron Kraft in the first 3 games, and this is the guy that we're going to see all season long, where he's
Which is
getting
totally fair.
15, 16 points per game and shooting 40% from three. I don't think we can expect that. I think we can expect him to take more of a role shooting the ball than he did last year. But what we saw from Ross last week was really encouraging, especially since the rest of the team really wasn't shooting particularly well. I think as a team they might have finished around 40% from the field, and I think you could probably do better than that at home against a team that's just coming out of Division II. If he's able to continue to play defense well enough to stay on the court for an extended period of time, I think that more than anybody else on the team, he has the potential to share that scoring load and be as explosive or close to as explosive as Thomas, which is going to really open things up for the rest of the guys.
Yeah, absolutely. I know this team hasn't quite gone as 10 deep as Thad Matta, was preaching at the beginning of the season, but he's been playing 8, 9, 10 guys. So if Q is that number 2, then that's just going to open it up for number 3, Linzel Smith, or whoever else steps up, Sam Thompson, whoever that may be. And, I think we'll certainly take any additional front court presence. Amir Williams and Evan Ravenel have just alternated looking explosive and looking really soft. They need to figure out how they can, it seems like both guys at times don't really jump. And that just is really weird to me from an offensive and defensive rebounding perspective. If they get off their ankles and really, get up there and soar, they can increase those rebounding numbers, potentially get putbacks on the offensive end. If just one of those guys can bring the intensity game in, game out, Ohio State will be just fine. Anyway, wrapping things up, joining me as always, Matt Brown. I'm Luke Zimmermann. Hangout in the Holy Land, Land-Grant Holy Land's video podcast. The 4th episode, Bret Bielema went to Arkansas. It's a weird time, but it's also probably not so much a great day to be a Badger. So.